This is Python's Paradise. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena. And folks, we are on August 3rd, 2021. And knock on wood, hopefully the pandemic had taken a hike because we just got in the green on July 31st. And we're hoping we can stay that way. But folks, we are going to be celebrating the legacy of somebody I grew up watching. A very, very funny guy. And I got his daughter on the show with me today. We're going to be celebrating the legacy of Mr. Don Knox with his daughter, Karen. How do you do, Karen?
Hi, I'm doing great. Good to be on your show.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Can you make the faces that your dad always made?
Sure, and that's how I introduce my show when I do my show Tied Up in Knots, which I've done on the road for 11 years now. And I say, I suppose you can tell I'm Don Knott's daughter. And they go, we look a lot alike. And then I don't hear any responses. So I go, what about if I do this? And so that's how they react. So that's my opening line to the show.
That is awesome. That is awesome. You know, I guess the first question that I have to ask is, what was it like growing up with Don Knox as a father?
Well, I get that question a lot.
I bet you do.
Because, a lot of people assume that he was like the character of Barney Fife. He wasn't really like a character, but he could at times, sometimes if he got nervous or excited, he would do those funny, expressions and faces and things. But in a book that I just wrote, also called Tied Up in Knots, is coming out at September 21st. I tell the whole story of what it was like to grow up with him. He was a wonderful father. He was really a great, great dad. When my brother Tom and I were kids, my dad, at that time, if the parents could afford one, they had a full set of encyclopedias. And my dad used to love to read from the encyclopedia. He'd say, "What do you want to hear about? What letter should we look in? What subject do you want to explore?" And so we'd pick a subject and he would read from the encyclopedia. So that's one of my fondest memories. But he was just a really great dad. He was very interested in everything that was going on with us.
And he served in the military as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
People know a lot about my dad, and they're always telling me things, like a lot of people know that my dad worked as a chicken plucker. That was the thing that went around on the internet. And have you heard about him working in the Army, or being in the Army? And if you have, what have you heard about that?
That he was in World War II.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I heard. And he got a few medals. And
Yeah.
I read that this morning and I'm like, it's phasey right now, but that was like, wow.
Well, I'll tell you, he was in the Army, but a lot of people think he was a drill sergeant in the Army, which was not true. He was not a drill sergeant. He performed in the Army in a show called Stars and Gripes, and that's how he got his start. He's a ventriloquist. In high school, he learned to do ventriloquism, and so he mentioned on the application that he was a ventriloquist, and they arbitrarily put him in an Army show just because he put that on there. So that was how he got in the Army, in the Army show. And from there, once he was in the Army show, he got to work with all these great comedians and performers, and it led to him getting jobs in New York City after the Army.
I heard that ventriloquist dummy took a flight overboard.
Yeah, at one point he finally decided he'd had enough of the ventriloquist, and so he asked the sergeant if he could just be in shows and not do the ventriloquism. And the sergeant said, "No, you're the only ventriloquist we've got out here." So my father lost the dummy. He just reported him MIA, and then they had to use him whatever way they could, because they certainly couldn't send him back to the States for losing his dummy. Well, the dummy wasn't as nervous as he was until he lost him.
Well, you know what? It's not easy to be in more than one sitcom. You know, Kelsey Grammer was able to do Cheers and Frasier, you know. A lot of times people have spin-offs and they don't do well. But your dad had the Andy Griffith Show and Three's Company, you know, which is very, very impressive. My dad grew up with the Andy Griffith Show. I grew up with Three's Company, you know. My dad currently, unfortunately, has ALS, but one day I was over at the house, and he was watching the Andy Griffith Show.
Mhm.
And of course, he was laughing at your dad.
Yeah. Right.
Now, I understand, I'm going to bring it up here, the IMDb here. Your dad and Andy Griffith met on No Time for Sergeants. That's correct, right?
Yes, they were.
Yep.
They were on the Broadway show.
Mm-hmm.
That's how he met Andy Griffith, and there's a great story about that. He and all the comedians used to meet in a coffee shop called Hanson's, either Hanson's or Crown, and all the comedians, Buddy Hackett, Jerry Seinfeld, Jerry Stiller, I mean, not Seinfeld, Jerry Stiller and Milton Berle and all these people, they would meet in the coffee shop. And if they got it for a nickel, they could get a cup of coffee and they were allowed to make a phone call to their agents. So they would call their agents and see, you know, what auditions were available. And then if, you know, it turned out they weren't right for it, then they would tell their friends and say, hey, you might be right for this. Why don't you go do that audition? And so another friend of his named Frank Behrens, who was mainly a voiceover actor, one day he walked into Hanson's and Frank looked up and said, what are you doing here? I thought you would be at the audition for No Time for Sergeants. And Dad hadn't heard about it. And he said, what's that? And he said, oh, it's a big new play. It's about World War II soldiers who were Southerners. And that's exactly what my dad was. And he said, well, what time is it over? And he said, it's going till 5 o'clock. It was 4:30. 4:30. He jumped on the subway and tore down to that audition. And he was told it's too late. They're not seeing any more people. And he begged and pleaded. Anyway, finally, he did get in and he auditioned and they wanted him for the part of the second lead, which was almost like a Barney Fife role. But he wasn't well enough known then. His name was not known. So they went with another fellow who incidentally happened to be a British actor. And I'm sorry, his name escaped me right now, but they hired him but Dad got the part of the Army psychiatrist, a small role. And so they would go and when they were in rehearsals, he walked out one day to take a break and there was Andy Griffith standing out there carving a piece of wood. Here's a Southern boy carving on a piece of wood, just like they did in the South. And he said, hey, ain't you Windy Wales? And my dad was doing a radio show called Windy Wales. And his voice was well known because he was playing the part of an old man. And Dad said, that's right. And Andy said, that's a pretty good little show. So they got to talking and they ended up becoming best friends. And the show ran for 2 years. And when it was over, well, no, actually it wasn't over. Right in the middle of the run, Andy was offered to make the movie No Time for Sergeants. So he left the show and he got Dad in that same part. So they actually made the movie together. No Time for Sergeant. So my dad's in the movie too. And they just, from there, they lost touch after the show was over. And Dad came out my dad was doing a TV show in New York. It was the Steve Allen Tonight Show, playing the nervous guy. And that's how he got that face, that nervous face. It's from the nervous guy character. And he was doing that for a few years. And he came out to Los Angeles. Andy, by that time, was also in Los Angeles doing the pilot for the Andy Griffith Show. And Dad heard about this from his friend, Pat Harrington. And Pat said, your friend is doing a TV pilot. Why don't you call him up? So he did. He called him up, and Andy immediately got him a meeting with Sheldon Leonard, and he went in there and pitched this idea for a nervous deputy. And that's how he got to be Barney on the Andy Griffith Show.
Well, my father was laughing at that, and he's not well right now, but it was nice to see him watching that and enjoying it, you know? Yeah, my dad grew up with that. I grew up with Three's Company. I remember your dad, first time I saw your dad was Mr. Furley, you know? And it's sad, you know, we lost John Ritter before we lost your dad.
I know, that was very sad.
Yeah. Do you remember, because they say that your dad was the last one from Three's Company to work with John Ritter. And do you remember much about your dad in Three's Company and his experiences with that show?
Oh yeah, and I write about that in my book too. By the way, my book, I have stories about all the shows he was on, and plus a lot of personal stories about him as a father and everything else. So I interviewed a lot of people, Three's Company, for the book, and I got some great stories. And there was, you may recall, or some of you recall, that Suzanne Summers left the show over a salary dispute. And I got some great information about her. And she was at the time trying to do a show for Las Vegas, because once she realized she was, you know, in danger of being kicked off the show because the producers were not going to meet her salary demands. So she asked my father to coach her on her show, and he did that. So he went and met with her and gave her a lot of advice, because he had done his own shows before he got on the Steve Allen show. He was doing nightclub acts, so he knew a lot about it, and he helped her out. And so my brother and I both went in on the show. And one time, when she was sort of on strike, because they were negotiating the salary thing, and she decided she wasn't going to go and do her part. So I didn't even know that she was having the salary dispute, because my dad didn't want me to get involved. So he didn't really tell me much. And the producer, Bernie, said, "Karen, go over there and tell Suzanne she's wanted on the set." So I went over to her and said, "Hey, they want you on the set." I'm like in my 20s, and I'm like, hey, you know, trying to be, you know, real friendly to her and stuff. And she just looked at me like, "Who the heck are you? What are you telling me this for?" But she was a very nice woman, though. She really was. And so my dad and she stayed friends. And after Three's Company, she got a show called She's the Sheriff, and she had my dad on her show. So they stayed in touch, and she was a great lady. It was unfortunate what happened there. It was like her first show, her first big break. And the producers of that show were not the kind of people that you can negotiate with. They were a tough crowd.
Yeah.
She really didn't know what she was getting into there. So my dad always felt kind of sorry for her in that situation.
Yeah. I also remember her as the woman in the white Cadillac in American Graffiti.
American Graffiti. Wasn't that beautiful? She was so beautiful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember so many episodes of Three's Company, you know, and of course Mr. Furley was brought in because of course the Ropers had
Right.
had left the show, and I thought it was great because Mr. Furley was one of these landlords that you could kind of talk into anything, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But did you know that when he first got on the show, there was a producer named Gene Parrott, and he was only there for a while. And Gene is a friend of mine now, because we've worked together, and he told me that they didn't know what to do with Mr. Furley when he first came on. So they set a meeting, and they said, "Why don't we make him a wannabe ladies' man?" And they decided that he would have these crazy outfits, you know, always trying to impress with his clothes. So every week they had the wardrobe department had to find the craziest outfit you could muster up for Mr. Furley. And another thing about his character was when Suzanne left, they had already written scripts that had her in it. So they took a lot of her lines and gave them to Mr. Furley. Because they didn't want to waste the lines, which is exactly the opposite of how they worked on the Andy Griffith Show, because in that show, character was everything. And so if a line didn't fit the character, even if it was a funny line, Andy Griffith had a hard and fast rule: you throw that line out. Exactly the opposite on Three's Company. They're like, the line comes first, then the character. So he ended up getting lines that Suzanne Summers would say. And so his part grew because of that, because they didn't want to get rid of her lines. So his part just kept getting funnier and funnier. And so he ended up having more lines, than a bigger part than Mr. Roper ever had.
You know, I remember I have so many memories of Three's Company, but I'm going to tell you, I always liked the old slapstick humor, especially messy humor. And I still remember the big pie fight they had in one episode where Janet threatens to hit Chrissy in the face with a pie, and Chrissy goes, no, 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 no. And then she flops it in her own face. But apparently I saw a clip of her doing I don't know what she was at, but she was signing autographs for people, and somebody connected with her, come up behind her, and slapped it in her face.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she reacted well to it. So
that would be a tough thing to react well to. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, but
but Joyce is so easygoing. She's such a nice gal. I really like her.
Yeah, no, I used to watch that show every week, and that was a lot of fun. But your father was in a lot of movies as well, and of course he played the nervous motorist, and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Um, that was a big movie. Your dad must have really enjoyed being part of that.
He was, and he almost didn't get in because he, unbelievably enough, turned the part down when it was first offered to him. I think he was just nervous about working with so many huge stars, because it was known that, Stanley Kramer is going to get every big star in town in this movie, and he did. He got, not all of them, but he got a lot of them: Milton Berle and Sid Caesar and Buddy Hackett and Mickey Rooney. And I think that my dad was a little nervous about that. So one evening he's sitting around at home and the phone rang, and it was Stanley Kramer on the phone. And Stanley Kramer says, "I understand you don't want to be in my movie." And my dad said, "Oh, are you kidding? Of course I do." So he did. He was in it, and he's one of the best, funniest things he's ever done.
And then, of course, the incredible Mr. Leppett.
Yeah.
Yep, that gave him more spotlight. And then, of course, we are on the 55th anniversary of The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, which I watched not too long ago.
Yeah, that's great. That was a lot of fun for my brother and me. We got to be extras in that movie. And we were at the picnic scene, where he loses his speech, and that famous line, "Attaboy, Luther," is thrown. And that line was delivered by one of the writers of the movie, Everett Greenbaum. And Everett had this crackling voice. He just had this funny voice. He talked like that all the time. That was his natural voice. And so whoever the actor was, a voiceover actor, whoever they had hired, didn't do it right. So Everett said he'll just do the voice himself. And so we were sitting there, my brother and I were sitting there in that crowd scene. And when the time came when he, in the Luther taps the microphone and says that must be a Democrat. He's imitating what the mayor says. And that voice came from, "Attaboy, Luther," and it sounded so loud. Everybody jumped out of their seats because it was ridiculous. So anyway, Yeah, it was Everett's voice.
Yeah, you believe that film? 55 years old. Now, I was born in 1972, so it was before my time. But of course, I love these old movies, and that, of course, was one of the big ones that your father was known for, was the Ghost of Mr. Chicken, and the shakiest gun in the West. Of course, that's like your
Yeah.
shakiest gun in the West. The Apple Dumpling Gang and its follow up. He got to be in that. So he's in a lot of these big Disney films. Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo. I grew up with those.
Mhm.
Um, the Private Eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. That was great.
Did talk about him working in the Private Eyes.
Well, I don't have any particular stories about that, but I know when he worked with Tim, he Tim improvised everything all the time, and my dad wasn't used to working that way. Although when he and Andy were on the set of the Andy Griffith Show, they did improvise all the time just for fun. And so, but he was used to learning and rehearsing lines and having everything very set. So with Tim, the script was basically a blueprint, for just whatever they felt like doing. And so when Tim would start making up the lines and Dad would go along with him. And there was one scene, I'm not sure that this was in one of the Apple Dumpling Gang movies, where they had to move a ladder. And it just said basically they move a ladder. And so they improvised, and that ladder scene turned out to be so funny. And it was nothing more but just basically stage directions in there. But the Private Eyes, I believe that was shot at the Biltmore Hotel. Is that the one? And it was extremely hot in there. And they were wearing they didn't have any air conditioning. It was like 100-year-old hotel. And they were wearing these all wool suits and everything, and just about died from the heat. And I just remember that much, Dad complaining about how hot that was. But other than that, he really he loved working with Tim.
Yeah. And of course, one last film I want to touch upon, of course, it's a film I saw in the theater, Pleasantville. And
Mhm.
of course, it was so cool. They have the black and white, and then they have the color. And I love how color symbolizes emotion in this film. But you got your father playing the 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 repair guy, the TV
Yeah.
repairman, and I remember him just coming on that screen. I was like, it was a while too since I had seen him, so it was just so nice because I know later on in his career he did a lot of voiceover stuff, but so it was really cool to see him in Pleasantville.
Mhm.
Was that like a nostalgia film project for your dad to do?
Not for him.
Mhm.
I think it was for the viewers, though.
Okay.
He didn't he got sick actually in the middle of that, and so some of his lines had to be dubbed later. So I think I don't think he was feeling very well at the time. But he was glad to do it, and I thought it was really terrific. The way he played the character was this like crabby kind of curmudgeonly guy, like kind of like the worst nightmare TV repairman you could have, you know. And he was wonderful in the role. And my dad actually, I always thought that was kind of funny because my dad could be like that sometimes. He could be kind of a curmudgeon sometimes. So
Mhm.
I thought it was funny in that sense that it was kind of a part of himself too, I really cracked up at that whole thing. It was great. I thought the movie was wonderful,
Mhm.
you know.
Do you have a favorite of his movies?
Oh, well, I have a lot.
Okay. What are your top three?
One of my favorites is one that most people have never seen, and it's called Love God. And the movie,
Okay.
the movie came out, let's see, it was in the 70s. It was The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, The Love God, The Reluctant Astronaut, The Shakiest Gun in the West, and How to Frame a Fig were part of a 5-picture deal he did with Universal Pictures, which was when he left the Andy Griffith Show to do that. He was offered that 5-picture deal where he would be the star and have a lot of creative control. And one of the pictures, The Love God, was a send up of Hugh Hefner in the Playboy clubs. And he played a guy who, excuse me, his character was the owner of a bird magazine, and he is a prolific bird watcher. And so, but the magazine is running out of money. And so another outfit comes along and offers to fund the magazine for them in exchange for them putting on their own content. And so that turns out that these people are publishers of a girly magazine.
Okay.
Like Playboy. And so, so basically they turn Abner Peacock into Hugh Hefner, basically. And they get him on all these wild, crazy outfits, and they've got all these women following him around all over town, and there are gangsters involved. It's just this wild caper. It's a really funny movie. But you see, what happened was the Universal people pretty much left my dad alone to do these projects because, you know, they were making money, they were fine, they had their own little outfit, their own producer, their own scripts, whatever. But when they found out that what this movie was about, they panicked because they thought that, you know, the clean comedy audience would freak out about Dad playing this character, even though it was really a clean movie. There was nothing really sexy about the movie except for Maureen R. Arthur's outfits. She played the lead in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. She was the boss's secretary who played the really sexy, won't you talk like this? So she was in it, and there's a lot of great actors were in it. So they basically shut down the PR department and buried it. But it's a very funny movie. I think it's one of my favorites. Another favorite of mine was The Reluctant Astronaut, because as a kid I got to go on the set, and I remember seeing the inside of the capsule and how the peanut butter was like all in like tubes. It was all hanging on wires, and I got to see that and all those things, and that's a really lovely little movie too.
Well,
And,
huh?
Go ahead. I've been thinking about some of the other movies that I liked.
Well, I was going to say, you did a book called Tied Up in Knots. Do you have that there?
Well, the book has not been released. It's set for release on September 21st.
Okay.
But you can order it on Amazon. There are pre-orders on Amazon. You would just type in Tied Up in Knots, Karen Knotts on Amazon. You can order the book and it'll come out. And then I will be setting up on my website where you'll be able to get you'll be able to get book prints signed by me if they want to do that. I'll have that available. My website is not ready yet because the books aren't even ready yet.
Okay.
But I think it's a great book. It's even though I wrote it myself. I love the book. But there are stories about being on the set of the Andy Griffith Show. There are stories about Three's Company and all the other. My dad did a ton of theater. People don't know that. There are a lot of fun theater stories in there, and all kinds of stories about his growing up, which is, I think, legend. I mean, my dad's real life is almost as well known as his career life, because he sort of become a folk hero over the years. You know, I don't know how that happened, but people just gravitate to him. And I get all the time, people send me cartoons, or I'm more likely to say drawings of him. They've drawn of him, or they've taken him and they said, Don Knotts as Eddie Haskell, or Don Knotts as Frank Sinatra, or Mick Jagger. And people love doing this. And so I've got a collection. So I've added these into my show. I do a live show called Tied Up in Knots. I'm starting to book that again. You know, now that the pandemic is over, I'm starting to get bookings again. But I'm also doing shows in churches, in nightclubs, any place that'll have me, basically, if they have a slide projector. And I put together these slides so people can see all the things that people have sent me over the years and continue to send me, showing my dad in these different poses. And some of them are just absolutely hilarious.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, I did it under the gun because they wanted it. They wanted the book to come out in time for Mayberry Days, which is a show that I have. I have a book, show book there. Mayberry Days is an annual festival that's a celebration of Mayberry and the Andy Griffith Show, and it comes out every year in September. And I'll be doing a show there on September 24th, I believe. You can go to my website, KarenKnotts.com, just my name, KarenKnotts.com. And in a day or two, it's not ready yet, in a day or two, I'll have the information about that festival and the website for the book. And you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Tied Up in Knots in Facebook, or just Karen Knotts. Like KarenKnotts.31, I think, is my handle there, because there's a lot of other Karen
Because
Knotts.
you're 31.
Oh, well, sure, if you want to believe that. Well, I love that. Too young to be doing this, but still.
Well, your dad was 39.
Sure, and he still is. In heaven, you can be any age you want to be, right?
There you go. There you go. So when you wrote this book, you did a lot of interviews with people. Is that how you were able to piece together, like, especially stuff in his career, elements in his career?
That is a great question. I that was a little bit tricky to do because, they're all over the place. For example, I interviewed Beau Bridges. I got to interview Beau Bridges because
Wow.
I know I got to interview all these people that I'm fans of. Beau Bridges was on my father's variety show, and most people don't even know about that. It only lasted 2 seasons. It was in the 1970s, and he had a lot of the popular people on there. And so Beau and Jeff Bridges and Lloyd Bridges, all 3 of them were on Dad's show. And so I interviewed Beau, and he told me a terrific story about I had no idea about this, that my dad was a practical joker. Most people don't know that, but he got this way because of growing up in the Great Depression. People did a lot of practical jokes, and I think they did that as a way to cope with the uncertainty and the fears of everybody being so broke and nobody having any money. And so they would play jokes on one another as a way of, like, here's your worst nightmare come true. Not really, just joking, that's what they did. And so he did that, and Andy Griffith and all these people played these practical jokes all the time. So Beau Bridges was not of the Great Depression era, however. And so Beau and Jeff were very nervous, a little bit nervous about being on the show. And so after the sketch was over, Dad said, "That was the worst thing you've ever done. That was terrible. How awful. That was a horrible thing." So they were like, and then he just burst out laughing, it was only a joke. So they were so shocked. They walked out of there just shaking in their boots. But now Beau says he tells that story every chance he gets. It's so funny. That was just so funny to see my dad, blowing steam like that, even though he was, it wasn't even serious.
So was there anybody you had a hard time tracking down for this book, or
Yeah, there were. Paul Rubens, he's Pee-wee.
Yeah.
I know Paul from the Groundlings. I used to be in the Groundlings, but I had lost track of him. And so I never did get to interview him. However, I got him to endorse the book, and he gave the book a great endorsement. And so I got 18 celebrity endorsements for the book. So I'm really excited about that. And that was another challenge, was Gary Busey. Oh yeah, this is a funny one too. I don't know Gary, but I know his wife, Stephanie Busey, who is also a stand-up comedian like me. And we met in a stand-up comedy class. And so I asked her if I could interview Gary Busey for the book. So she said, yeah, come down and meet us in front of this club. So I went down to the club and I sat in their car and interviewed him. And he is just like you would think he'd be. He's all over the place. He's Mr. Improv guy. He's just here, there, and everywhere. And like, he just goes from one topic to another, just like lightning fast. And so, and I had all this stuff on my tape, and I was like, how on earth am I going to put all this together? Because you just jump from one topic to the next. So what I did was I ended up putting that in the preface of the book, because I really couldn't put it together. I could not put it together into one paragraph because it was just too. So I put it as it was in the preface, and I just said, because it was funny as it was. So I just put it in there, like, this is Gary Busey, And it was really fun to interview him. And a lot of times people, when I'm interviewing them, they'll turn it around and start interviewing me. And they'll be like, tell me about your father. So all of a sudden I'm the one being interviewed. And that happened with John Waters. John Waters is
John Waters.
John Waters, I know if you're a fan of.
Oh, I'm very familiar. I met Mink Stool at a convention.
Oh, did? Okay.
Yeah. Pink Flamingo is not the kind of movie I would have ever seen your dad in.
This is a funny thing because, Pink Flamingos, and also now the more recent one, Hairspray, is much more known, in the general public. But we lived in West LA, and every day I would walk past the movie showing Pink Flamingos. It was the New Art. So I knew John Waters because my dad would always say, so-and-so is a big fan of mine. Billy Bob Thornton is a big fan of mine, or he'd also say, Jim Carrey's a big fan of mine, He would always brag about these people like, Dad, everybody is a big fan of yours.
Yeah.
What are you telling me? Of course, everybody is a big fan of yours. So anyway, he used to say, John Waters is a big fan of mine. And so I thought this is kind of funny because the only thing I knew about John Waters was that Pink Flamingos movie. And I was so naive in those days because I didn't know what the movie was about, but since it was playing at the New Art for like 30 years, I thought it must be a very popular film. And so I thought they must be great friends. He's so proud to have John Waters as a fan of his. So anyway, I was interviewing John Waters, and John has a great personality. He's really a funny guy. And I said, so I guess you and Dad are great friends, and how did you meet? And he goes, oh, I've never met him. He just, he always wanted to meet him. And, John is gay. And I think he wanted to date my dad. He had a crush on him. Tried to get him to go with him to a premiere, and my dad's manager said no, he's too busy or something, and it turned out that my dad was going on the road with a show, and he was very nervous, and that was the only reason why he didn't go to the premiere. But yeah, he actually confided to somebody, I've got a crush on Don Knotts. Some gay friend of his, and that gay friend confided that same thing to my dad's wife at the time, Francie. And when I interviewed Francie, that's how she told me that John had a crush on my dad. And that's how I found out about that. So, of course, I put that in the book, too.
Skittles is a big fan of your dad.
Hi, Skittles. That must be Skittles. Yeah. Okay.
Skittles. Skittles come
Skittles looks very nonplussed by being in show business. You're on camera, Skittles.
Yeah. Did your dad actually see Pink Flamingos? I could just imagine.
No, I don't think so. I doubt it.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like that.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it yet. I still haven't seen it, but I want to because I want to know what all the fuss is about.
It's X-rated for a reason.
I'm sure it is. But I'm
But
curious to see it anyway.
yeah, I did meet one of the performers that's in it, and I interviewed the son of one
Oh,
of the late actresses that's in it.
yeah.
So yep, yep. But yeah, I saw that in Toronto with a very wild audience, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's harsh. There's nothing else like it. But I was able to handle it.
Oh, good. You've not been scathed.
Oh, I had to see it with an audience. I know that.
Sure, yeah.
Yep, that was a given. But yeah, of course, everybody was a fan of your dad. Look, Skittles up on the
Yeah, right.
Skittles is stealing the spotlight here.
I
But
just see a tail in front of your face. That's funny.
yeah, yeah. Did you have pets growing up?
Well, I had a dog, and my dog was beloved by everyone, including my dad. And we had living next door in Beverly Hills, a renowned screenwriter.
Mm-hmm.
He used to be associated with Stanley Kramer. They were a team, and I'm sorry his name escapes me at the moment. But
Mm-hmm.
this screenwriter had a lovely garden of roses, but he was always angry because my dog liked to go in his rose garden. And so he was always kind of teed off at us about Veer, my dog, going in this man's rose garden. So I said, Dad, it's too bad you're not going to get to play in his movie. He wrote the movie Young Winston about
Okay.
Winston Churchill. I said, Dad, it's too bad you're not going to get to play Winston Churchill's nervous father in Young Winston.
Did your dad say he was a big fan of his?
No, he was the one that didn't. He was the fan that got away. He didn't he never became a big fan, or if he was, he didn't say so because he's always kind of teed off about the dog in his rose garden.
Yeah. So you do stand up. Now, how much of an influence was your dad on you being a stand-up comedian, and how much did you take from him?
Well, he fought that. He didn't want me going into stand-up comedy. Now, at the time, it was a very, very difficult field for women. It's better now. It's still not great, but it's much better now. And back then, stand-up comedy was much more of a male kind of thing because they told jokes straight out. Now, I remember in the 80s, prop jokes became popular. But Phyllis Diller was his only frame of reference. My father thought of Phyllis Diller when he thought of a woman stand-up comedian. And he's like thinking of the hair, the wild hair, the cigarette holder, and saying, he couldn't picture me like that. So he fought me on that. But in the end, he came around and supported me. He came to see me at the Comedy Store. And even when I was in play with him in Arizona, he and the cast came to see me perform a little club out there. So he always supported me, even if he fought it, he always came around to supporting me in the end.
I find it funny because I lost a lot of respect for Jerry Lewis because Jerry Lewis had said women can't be funny.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what a ridiculous statement, because I'm single probably because I find women funny.
Oh, I see you just laugh at them all the time.
I find women funny.
Oh, thank you.
And
I appreciate that.
like I'm a big Emma Stone fan, and I can laugh at her even in her serious roles.
Oh, have you seen Cruella? She's really good.
Oh, loved Cruella. Loved Cruella.
She's great in that. Wow, man.
Yeah, I like her. I think Kate McKinnon is hysterical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say, a lot of men do have that, do hold that opinion. And I've even been confronted by a man like that in a comedy club before I went on stage, who said that to me. And afterwards, he had to eat his words because he did laugh at me, but he made up some excuse why he laughed. Didn't want to give me credit for it.
Well, look at Lily Tomlin. Remember the this is your telephone operator. I
Yeah,
still
sure.
remember a lot of that,
Yeah.
There was all kinds of funny women. Lucille Ball,
Yeah, I know. So the only thing I can think is that they just have some sort of preconceived idea about women, that they're just not going to find them funny no matter what. So that's on them, that's on them. That's not on us.
I find them funny, and it's probably why I'm still single. Yeah. No, I find women funny, and I can think of all kinds of examples of things women have done that I find funny, particularly in movies. But I find with me, if I'm picking and poking at somebody, like just as a tease, it's generally women, not males, because I grew up belonging to that group of kids that used to pull the ponytails.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That kind of kid, huh? It's like
yeah,
teaser.
yeah. So I I don't agree with Jerry Lewis on his little stance there. And yeah, I think there's all kinds. Sarah Silverman, I think, is hilarious.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of funny women out there. If people can put their prejudice aside. You
Yes.
know, yeah. Um, but yeah, but I'm glad your dad got to see you perform.
Mhm. I was on stage with I was doing a comedy bit at that time. Sketch comedy was very popular, and I had this guy, Tim Frisbee, his name is, and we were doing a little sketch, and he was doing a Superman bit. My dad was in the audience. I did my stand up, and Tim got up there and did his Superman bit. He dropped the microphone. He was so nervous, but my dad was in the office, and he fell off the stage. So that was a show my dad got to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So
That's showbiz. It happens.
yeah, I don't want to go on a downer note here, but talk about when your dad had passed away.
Well, I went to see him in the hospital every day, and he wasn't. He was, sometimes he could communicate and sometimes not. But I do remember, and this is kind of interesting because I talked about this in an article, and Fox News
Mm-hmm.
got a hold of this story and blew it up on the internet. But what I had said was that when my dad was lying on his deathbed, he was so funny that my stepmother and I had to run out of the room. And this is actually true. He was being funny, and it was just, my dad had this natural humor that went beyond lines or scripts or even himself. He just had this funniness that was so innate to him. And he was just being so funny. And here he was like dying. I mean, it seemed like he was going to die the next day or whatever. And I didn't want to stand there laughing at my dying father. So I ran out of the room. And I told this story to Howard Storm, who knew my dad, and he was a big director of Mork and Mindy. And I told this story to my dad, and he said, "You should have just stayed there and laughed. That's what comedians live for." So I thought, yeah, maybe he's right. But on the other hand, sometimes if my dad didn't mean to be funny, he could be sensitive about it too. So it was a tough call. But he
Yeah.
probably didn't. I don't know if he even was aware of me being in the room at all. I don't even know that. But we were all there for him. Andy Griffith came, and they had a conversation. And then my brother, my stepmother, Francie at the time, and I, the three of us were there with him when he passed. And it was very touching. And we all went back afterwards. We all went back to his condo, and we just sat there in the condo, and we felt his spirit. It was really interesting. We just felt his spirit there. And we all stayed together in the condo that night. And it was kind of funny. It was like, I was aware, okay, when morning comes, that phone is going to ring and it's not going to stop. So we need to just enjoy the moment. And sure enough, about 6 o'clock the next morning, the phone started to ring, and it rang for the whole week nonstop. but it was a way for me to connect with fans and people that hadn't seen him for a while, and it was a way to grieve and and share that. So it was all, it's life.
Did your dad ever? I just started doing the convention scene in 2017, but I know they've been going on a long time. Did your dad ever get to do the Comic Cons or anything like that?
Well, I don't know. He might have, but in those days, the Comic Con wasn't what it is today. He would have, for sure, by this time, if he were still living, he would have done it. But he did a lot of autograph shows.
Oh,
he did a lot of the autograph shows, like they have them at the Beverly Garland Hotel, and also back in North Carolina when he did the Mayberry events at the Grand Ole Opry. They had all those events. He did quite a few of those, and people would give him bullets all the time. They would, they'd go by and offer him a bullet. So he had all these bullets that he didn't know what to do with.
do you remember what the most interesting thing he's ever autographed?
Well, he said that a man that I interviewed for the book said that it was a bottle of beer. He was at a wedding in West Virginia, and he was just kind of trying to be incognito, and somebody handed him a bottle of beer, and he said, well, I've never signed one of these before, but this is the first one. So he handed him that.
Wow. So how do I segue into this? I was going to ask what made you want to go into being a comedian, but I suppose that probably ties in with your dad, or does it?
Well, I don't know. I was just always drawn to that. And of course, seeing him on, going and visiting the Andy Griffith Show set, I'm sure that had something to do with it too. But when you have that talent, you get that calling. You just don't know where it comes from. But he, like I said, he didn't want me to be an actor at first. He was afraid I would be disappointed, and he knew so many people that tried to get in the business and they ended up with nothing. He didn't want that to happen. But oddly enough, he really reversed himself, because he put me on his variety show when I was 16 years old. He gave me a spot, and I think that had to do with an actress named Elaine Joyce. Elaine Joyce was on his show, and she said, "I'll put Karen on your show." I think she was really supporting me, and she was a beautiful woman, this tall, beautiful blonde woman, and she encouraged him, and so he did. He put me on the show, and the writers wrote exactly what happened, which was he didn't want me to be in show business. And so they wrote a little sketch about him putting me on the show in spite of his true feelings. So he goes, this is my daughter, Karen. And this is actually a great way for us to end our podcast here, because this is like the way he introduced me was the same way I left. He goes, ladies and gentlemen, here she is, Miss Karen Knotts. So I get a little nervous, and he goes, you're on. And I'm more nervous, I'm really shaking. And he goes, you see, folks, this is, I told her this would be over her head. Anyway, folks, so then I launch into this dramatic monologue, and it went over very well. He, it got a great applause. So even though he really didn't want me to go into show business, he ended up encouraging me completely by putting me on that show at 16. So he was just great.
Well, you know what? Before we end this, I would love to have you come back on the show to talk about your career on television. And I know you did some Vice Academy movies and whatnot. I would love to have you come on and talk about your career in stand-up and your career in the movies and television. Would you like to do that?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
love to have you come back, and because I thought I'd make this one about your dad, but I would love to do one and spotlight you yourself.
Well, thank you. I would like to do that.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll set something up, maybe even later on this month if you're up for it. Yeah, but your book, Tied Up in Knots.
Yes. What are the Knots, the book and the show, and also KarenKnots.com, my website.
Mm-hmm.
And they can find me on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Knots Funny Farm.
Do you have any charities that you want to plug on here that you're involved with?
Well, I don't now. I'm glad you asked though, because I am going to be getting involved. I'm interested in mental health. And I talk about that in my book. I actually had a nervous breakdown at one point in my life. And I talk about that in my book for a few pages. And I think that the readers would be interested in what it's like when you actually do lose your mind, as I did at that point. And so, yes, thank you I appreciate you wanting to have me back.
I would love to have you back, and yeah, we can talk about that when you come back. And yeah, I know your dad's played some characters that lost their mind a few times. Thank you so much. And yes, the book, Tied Up in Knots, coming out September 21st, you say?
That's right. Yes, that's right. It's on Amazon now, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely. Yes, we'll promote that. Are you going to be doing any signings for that?
I will. I don't have any dates though at the moment, but I will be announcing them on all those platforms I mentioned and on my website too.
I'll have to get a signed copy. I'll have to order a signed copy from you.
Okay.
Absolutely. I would love to have you back. We'll
Thank you.
spotlight you next time, you know.
All
But
right.
today we are celebrating the legacy of Don Knox, somebody that I know my dad, mom grew up with, and I grew up with. They were the Andy Griffith grew up with that, and I grew up with three companies, so you get the generation thing there.
It's amazing. I know. It spans so many generations.
But it was nice seeing my dad, who is not well,
Yeah.
watching the Andy Griffith show and just still
Yeah.
just loving and appreciating it and
Wonderful.
finding joy in it. Before I let you go, would you mind doing a plug for my show?
Okay. What do you want me to say exactly? Because I don't know too much about your show, except that you are a great interviewer.
Well, I appreciate that. Just state your name and say you're watching or listening, depending on what they're doing, listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise.
Hey, everybody. This is Karen Knotts watching Gilbert's. Wait a minute. Sorry. Let's run that again. Can you tell me the information again and I'll run it?
Greg Gilbert, Python's Paradise.
Greg Gilbert, Python's Paradise.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. This is Karen Knotts. I hope you'll join me watching. Oh, no. I'm going to write it down because that's what's on my mind. Greg Gilbert. Okay. Greg Gilbert, Python's Paradise. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Karen Knotts. I hope you'll enjoy watching me on Greg Gilbert's Python's Paradise. We'll talk about growing up with my dad, Don Knotts. And this is Karen Knotts. Thank you for tuning in.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to booking you back in again, and we'll celebrate you. By the way, I love the colors you got on.
Oh, thank you.
Red and orange, and you got the necklace. Nice. You got like a reddish color. Is your hair red?
No, it isn't. And during the pandemic, I was doing my own color.
Okay.
I was doing this temporary color, and I just thought for a fluke I would try different colors. It says temporary on the thing, but the temporary never left. So it became permanent.
Looks fine to me.
You like it? Okay.
Yeah, I think it looks fine. Looks fine. Yep.
Cool. Then it's good.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for coming on here today. I appreciate it so much, and God bless
Sure.
you. And
You're welcome. And if you want to send me a link, I'll post the link too on my social media.
I'll be
How
doing that. Yep,
viewers can watch that.
absolutely. I'm going to be doing it up here shortly, and when I have it ready, I'll send it to your email, and you can put it up and post it
Okay.
wherever you want to.
Okay, that'll be fine. I'll post it everywhere.
All right. Next time we have you on, we could talk about whether your dad had dyed his hair.
Oh, that's a good story too.
Did he dye his hair red too?
No.
I look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
All
You
right. You
have
you have yourself a wonderful, wonderful day, and God bless you.
Thank you. You too. You
Yep.
too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.